we're just spending more and more money as a government that we really can't afford, putting the tab on future generations. And all of that really is bullish for risk assets because
Meanwhile, we got a wonderful guest.
Teasing the altcoins, the thunder. I don't know if you can hear it through the mic, Natalie, but it is pouring outside today, and markets are just rattled. But welcome back to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here today. We have tons of questions for you. But how you doing?
Well, thanks for having me. I don't think we're in the same city, but it was pouring all night last night. So I guess the storms are coming, but I don't think it's coming for Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin has sunny skies ahead.
Are you in Georgia or no?
I'm in St. Louis.
Okay, so a couple states away, but might be still the same thunder. It's coming from your guys' area, which is why we're getting the rain today. But we want to ask you, okay? I think we've seen almost every single interview you've produced on your channel, and there's a lot of conversations right now about there's probably 4 main events that are going to be happening in 2024. One of the biggest is going to be the interest rate cuts, and as an investing journalist that's been speaking to the people that have been analyzing this for week after week at this point, what does this mean for Bitcoin's price action? Is this bearish or is this bullish with whatever the Feds are going to decide to do?
Well, I think in the near term, it's going to remain pretty choppy, but to the upside, right? We do have these new ETF products that are seeing significant amounts of demand. The last week, the price was hit a little bit by the GBTC outflows, but there's still more net buying than selling. So I think in the short term, it might be rocky, especially given the macro factors that we have. The Fed did signal that they're going to cut interest rates. Usually when they cut, that's not a very good sign. It usually means something's going wrong in the economy, and we do still have sticky inflation. So, it's anyone's guess what's going to happen in the short term. But I think overall, what we do have is the Fed is still, in trying to take control of the wheel in terms of fighting inflation, but inflation is ticking up higher. We're in fiscal dominance, as Luke Gromen, who was just on my show, puts it, meaning that we're just spending more and more money as a government that we really can't afford, putting the tab on future generations. And all of that really is bullish for risk assets because as the money comes out, it has to go somewhere, and it typically goes to equities. It's obviously going into Bitcoin. Gold recently doing pretty well too. So I think Bitcoin's going to look pretty good this year.
All right, now you're bringing up the short term, but I want to highlight something on the long term, and that is Cathie Wood's bold prediction of a $3.8 million Bitcoin. Yeah. I think in a long enough time scale, we all think it's possible. Sure, the year 2150, who knows what a can of Coke costs or a pound of coffee beans or what one Bitcoin would cost. What is your thoughts of a $1 million Bitcoin, $3.8 million Bitcoin? A lot of people think, well, that won't happen in my lifetime. But what would you say to that?
Yeah, I was pretty pleasantly surprised by her new bullish prediction that she mentioned at the Bitcoin Investor Day. Originally, ARK Invest was forecasting about a $1.5 million Bitcoin by 2030, but she said that she upped that prediction because of all the institutional demand that is coming in, especially with these ETF products. And a lot of pension funds are going to be shifting some of their allocations to Bitcoin because of the performance. It speaks for itself. So, I don't think it's out of the question, but I tend to have more humble expectations. I like to temper my views on Bitcoin. I do think eventually it will get to a million a coin. I don't know how long that will take, but that will also mean what is $1 million worth, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the great things about Bitcoin is it protects you from the debasement of the currency. And $100 isn't what it used to be. $1 million isn't what it used to be. Look at houses, right? So I don't know what that will mean, but of course, Bitcoin will hit $1 million at some point.
Yeah, this comes as well, like you just said it too. Like they can't stop printing money at this point. We had a $1.2 trillion bill just pass. It's, this government just can't get that budget in wraps. They can't control it. They can't stop themselves from printing more money. Do you see this trend just continuing to emerge? Are we ever going to see a reduction in these bills? Because it feels like every single one that comes through is just higher and higher. The next one's going to be 1.5. Then it's going to be 2 trillion. Is this going to be what pushes us to more sovereign nations adopting Bitcoin? And could that fall over to Cathie Wood's price prediction of this 3.8 million because of the inflation?
I do. I mean, this is the debt spiral that so many people in the space refer to, and why they call it the fiat Ponzi, because our system requires ever expanding credit to produce less and less real growth and productivity, which is what's really sad. And that's what's decimating the middle class and the working class. And that's why they need a life raft like Bitcoin. So yes, of course, they're going to have to keep spending. A lot of that's going to go to interest expense. At some point, the buck has to stop when the interest rates get so high that the interest rate servicing is too much for the government. They're going to have to lower it again and try to inflate it away. And of course, that debases the dollar, crushes everyone's purchasing power. So you need to find hard, scarce assets. And Bitcoin, I think, is the best one. And it's proven itself over the last 15 years. And with these new products, I think it's only, the sky is the limit for Bitcoin.
Well, speaking of debt, we have had a couple presidents operate our government with a surplus. I think a lot of younger people, that's just almost impossible to fathom. Wait, we pulled in more money than we spent? I didn't know that was possible. I think it was almost probably 30 years ago. Clinton did it, Slick Willie. But at this point, you brought up the debt. Are debt payments so high we'll never have a deficit again?
Well, if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, their projections, they are looking at an expansion of the balance sheet and growing debt over the next several decades, which really you have to start to question, how are we going to be able to pay for that? And how is this sustainable? And Citadel CEO Ken Griffin, I just covered this on my show. He said that that's one of the biggest underappreciated risks. What we're doing, especially on a global stage, we're really hurting the dollar. We are hurting the ability for people to continue to trust our currency and to continue to purchase our bonds. And so who's going to have to buy them? We are, and we're going to have to print the money to do it and continue to destroy purchasing power. So people really need to protect themselves. This is why I'm really passionate about helping people understand this, because so many people are going around blaming politics and, becoming polarized, thinking that what's to blame is whether it's red or blue, but it's not. Our money is broke and they need to look deeper. And that's what Bitcoin kind of forces you to do, is look at the underlying system, what's broken in it, how messed up the incentives are, and what can we actually do to fix it? Because we can talk about the problems all day, but let's focus on the solution so that we can build a better future that's more prosperous and has more opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, people seem to forget that it's two parties under one very broken system. And that kind of leads to, of course, how do we move from this? Because, of course, the BlackRock, the Vanguards, the State Streets, the Fidelities, they've lied to us year after year after year, saying this is a money laundering index, that we need to risk manage, that betting ourselves on this risky asset class is only going to damage us in the futures. Yet they're turning around and launching the very financial instruments that are going to make them, let's face it, billions upon billions of dollars in the future. Should we be for, or even, I guess what would the right question be here is, should we be protesting this as an industry with these asset managers coming into this? Or how do we adopt this without favoring them once again and breaking the system all over again?
Well, first of all, always watch what they do, not what they say. I do think it's really interesting to see how many turnarounds there have been, even from some of the most legendary investors who once said they weren't into Bitcoin and now they are extremely for it or launching products. I think that everyone who joins the Bitcoin network and starts adopting this technology, it's accretive to the overall network and to everyone who holds Bitcoin. I think there will be nation states that come in. Wall Street was inevitable. But most importantly, this was a working class phenomenon that trickled up. This is an emergent technology from the free market. No one is imposing this on anyone top down, which is why it's so amazing. And it's not too late. A lot of people think, the Bitcoin price, it's gotten away from me. Look at the price of Satoshis. Everyone can afford a little bit of Bitcoin starting today. And it's really important to accumulate. I mean, I think that this is the future. I think everyone will be eventually on the Bitcoin standard. And I think it's time for people to really be able to adopt a technology that will make them richer and be able to save and plan for their futures, as opposed to the opposite. Right now, there is a lot of overall risk and leverage in the system, and everything is underperformed compared to Bitcoin. So although it might be volatile in the short term, it might be risky if you need to make a payment in the next 1 month or 1 year to be able to, put everything into Bitcoin, but zoom out, look over the last 4, 5, 10 years. And I think Bitcoin is really the safest place to be, and the asset class that everyone will be allocating not just a small percentage, but I think a significant percentage over the next decade. I think that these money managers and Wall Street, I think they're going to be recommending percentages up to 33% of portfolios. I really, really do. And
Wow.
instead of, focusing on the negative, I think we need to realize that there are some institutions, there are pension funds, there are, some investors who haven't been able to allocate to Bitcoin. Hopefully that changes with things like FASB accounting rules, evolving so that you can actually do fair market value for Bitcoin as opposed to just marking when it goes down in terms of the corporate treasuries and balance sheets. I think that more and more companies will start to allocate to Bitcoin, and the ETF products have just been another avenue for certain investors to be able to invest in this space. And maybe it's also a starting point before they actually get real Bitcoin.
Well, speaking of a starting point for real Bitcoin, UK just got a real amount of Bitcoin, $2.5 billion worth. I don't know if you saw that story there. 2.5 billion, which is almost how many subs you got. Just congrats on your big new play button. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, everybody. But UK government just seized $2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin just this past week. What do you think the UK government is going to do? Are they going to follow US footsteps and auction this off? Or should they start hodling? And what would you recommend?
Well, if they have some smart Bitcoiners working with them, then hopefully they'll recommend that the country hodls. But, I'm not really sure. Some nation states are going to be behind. And surprisingly, we often see the Western nations, which I think should be at the forefront of this type of technology. They're the ones that are sort of pushing against it. And so instead, we'll see some of these developing nations, like we saw El Salvador, maybe move to this monetary standard first. But again, whoever adopts it first will benefit more. That doesn't mean that you don't benefit if you adopt it 7 years from now, but if you adopt it now, it's certainly going to be a lot better. And El Salvador is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and you had the opportunity to recently interview Michael Saylor here, who has talked about becoming a Bitcoin development company. So, of course, there is the underlying asset of Bitcoin itself, but we're seeing more and more companies such as Marathon Digital announce their Bitcoin sidechains, their layer twos, their slipstream services to offer, of course, a better transaction for their mempool providers through these ordinals and all of this new adoption that's coming within the system. Do you have any insight from that hour-long interview about where the development is heading for Bitcoin's ecosystem and all of these different payment solutions?
All I know is that the ecosystem is very robust and growing. I mean, we had basically a 2-year bear market, and a lot of people just focused on building during that time. I was able to meet a lot of different companies, many of them actually focusing on the Lightning Network so that they can empower Bitcoin to be a very secure transaction network. I think this is going to be really important, especially for businesses. I mean, when you zoom out, the cybersecurity of a nation is our businesses being able to securely transact with one another globally. And with all of the risks that exist in a digital economy with denial of service attacks and AI and all of that, we need a trust network. And Bitcoin is that valuable trust network. And so Michael Saylor is certainly taking advantage of the Bitcoin network in that way. I know a lot of companies also are. There are a lot of amazing people that are just trying to build, coming up with ideas, doing incubators like Wolf in New York and others. And so I think it's really exciting. And when we fast forward 5-10 years, I can't even imagine how many companies will exist in this space, including more killer apps where you can, just make it very easy and convenient for people to have Bitcoin wallets, be able to safely store their Bitcoin in self-custody, which I think is really important, and be able to transact with one another as a medium of exchange.
Well, I have a follow-up on that Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem because there's a large contingent of Bitcoin whales who they'll just never part with their Bitcoin. They don't want to, they don't want to dive into the DeFi ecosystem, aka they don't want to touch Ethereum. They don't want to touch Aave. They don't want to touch stablecoins. They just like their big shiny yellow coin. I'm just going to keep it that way, orange coin. But what about Bitcoin L2's sparking interest in DeFi? Do you think the old school Bitcoin whales, they've had Bitcoin for more than 10 years, will they be attracted to the Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem? Or will they see that under the same lens as Ethereum DeFi?
I think it will depend. I mean, hardcore Bitcoiners are not for any of the other tokens, but there are certainly people that are interested in the ordinals and different things being built on top of Bitcoin. The greatest thing about this is really the freest market that I think exists in our economy. There are no rulers. There are just rules that you have to follow in Bitcoin, which I think is fantastic. And it levels the playing field in what is otherwise a very rigged financial system that benefits the few at the expense of the many. So, let the market speak for itself. Let things that are meant to fail actually fail and not be bailed out, and let the things that win, rise to the surface. And that'll be based on quality and value and merit, I think.
What do you mean by the financial system has failed? Just for everybody that's new, that's coming to these markets. Because I think, sometimes we forget that there's a whole world out there that's not a part of crypto. And as soon as they come into these markets, they see Bitcoin hitting $60,000, they see it hitting $70,000. That's when they finally decide to make that decision to enter the market. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they come into tops of cycles and end up hurting themselves. So what is it about Bitcoin that is so just beautiful in this absence of a failing system? What is that failing system? And again, what does that failing infrastructure look like to you?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for people to take some time and study the history of money, because what we do see is the rise and fall of empires, all of which at some point were the global reserve currency, because there's so much power and privilege that comes with being able to issue a currency. And every nation state issues a currency, right? But there is one that is the most powerful. And we've certainly had so many advantages globally by being the global reserve currency. I don't think that's going to be the case for the next 100 years, because I see fiat overall as a failed experiment, since we've depegged it from anything of real value, anything like gold. We used to be on the gold standard. And when you remove any tether to the real world and something that actually is backing the currency, like with gold, then I think you move into a system where, again, someone is printing the money. They have to continue to issue credit and issue more and more dollars. And the working class is who really pays for that, because the money, with the Cantillon effect, it pools at the top. The people that are the most creditworthy, the big corporations, the wealthy, they see the money first. It benefits you if you're close to the money printer at the expense of everyone else who continually sees their currency debased. What's great about Bitcoin is a lot of people say it's backed by nothing. Well, actually, it's backed by energy, and you can't cheat energy, right? That's why the network is immutable. No transaction has ever been reversed or needed to be reversed in that sense, because it is the truth network that when you send something from here globally around the world, it will be final settlement. It's not credit. It's not anyone's liability. It's not an IOU, which is completely different from the system we currently reside in. And so I think that's why this paradigm shift is so hard for so many people to understand, because we live in a system based on credit where people issue money, including banks, money that does not exist, that wasn't deferred savings. It's just made out of thin air and devalues everyone else's units or dollars or whatever currency. And Bitcoin is fundamentally different. It is no one's liability. It is tied to energy. It is the most powerful computing network in the world. And it's based on real value. I think it's going to level the playing field when it comes to our economic activity, which is really the base layer of all of human interaction around the globe.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with that. I think there's two ways you can make a lot of money coming up into this next century, and that is either become a politician and be lobbied, because that's obviously the easiest way to print money, or actually build and become a part of Bitcoin's ecosystem. Natalie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today, and thank you so much for joining us, and congrats again on all the success on your channel.
Well, thank you so much. And that's the whole point of Bitcoin. Decouple the power from these politicians who just enrich themselves. If they couldn't print money, they wouldn't be able to do that as easily. So that's why I'm for Bitcoin. Thanks for having me.